Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the LangShack. So today we have a very interesting presentation about a language that isn't really very well known, and it was pretty much recently only determined that it was a separate language. However, there's still some people that believe it's just a dialect of Seoul Korean. So I'm excited to show everybody this language. This is going to require a part two because there's just so many things that make this particular language unique and the way that it's become distinct from mainland Korean. So I think that this is going to be very interesting, especially to people who already speak Korean or who have studied the language in the past. This is going to be very interesting. But I am going to be focusing on some aspects of this language, and in the next video, I'll go over more about some of its other features. So let's dive into this presentation here. So the Jeju language distribution. In South Korea, the only place where this is spoken is Jeju Island, as you see in the red at the south to the southwest of all those islands there. And it's also spoken in some small communities in Osaka in Japan. And those communities may or may not be more rigorous. However, it's going through the same situation as the Jeju people that live on Jeju Island are going through in South Korea at this moment. So the situation on the Jeju language. So historically, most linguists of Koreanic languages have classified the Jeju language as simply a quote-unquote conservative dialect of Korean. The language derived from a form of medieval Korean. However, there are some that believe that it came from a form of late ancient Korean. However, it's not exactly known how this evolution was done. And it was ruled by I assume a Koreanic kingdom called the Tam. It's written Tamra, however, Tamna, I believe, is the correct pronunciation of this. The Tamna Kingdom, before it was absorbed into Korea proper, into specifically, I believe, the Joseon and dynasty in Korea in 1404. And after this, it's not really known that the original language that was spoken there at the time, which I assume was Jeju, or an earlier version of it, left remnants in Jeju. Whether this was a Koreanic language or whether this was some believe that it was had a substratum of a Japonic language. That's a little bit doubtful, especially now. And some may believe it was just Tamna. So the relation may be similar to how Ryukyu languages are to Japanese itself. That kind of separation. Until the 2010s, the Jeju language or dialect was simply referred to as a very divergent dialect of the Korean language. There are generally 6 or 7 different dialects of Korean that are classified in South Korea. North Korea has its own dialects. However, we're talking about South Korean here. And as more and more linguists have studied this language more and more in depth, it has more have realized that it is a standalone language. And the grammar system is also very different from standard Korean. So it makes it easier and easier to say that it is definitely a separate language. Another thing to note is that the Jeju language is not mutually intelligible whatsoever with standard Korean. So there have been back when the islands were first taken over by the kingdom that was ruling the entire peninsula, they had gone to Jeju, and at that time it was already considered a divergent dialect of the language. This is probably when medieval Korean was being spoken. However, by the 1600s, the language was considered already mutually unintelligible with what was spoken in the mainland of Korea. And in the 1620s, the Korean kingdom or the Korean royalty, whoever ruled Korea at that time, decided to ban the immigration or the emigration of Jeju Islanders from Jeju to the mainland, which contributed more to its divergence from the mainstream Korean language, and then for many centuries, from the 1300s until the 1900s, the Choson dynasty was known to send some of its exiles, especially those that were opposed to it, and very educated people were sent to Jeju Island. And oftentimes when they got there, they were selected because they knew Seoul Korean. They educated a lot of the upper class in Jeju, and that also contributed to the language getting some what at the time was Korean features. So more mainland Korean features got into the language. And another thing about this language is that it is a seriously endangered language already. The island has a population of over 600,000 people. Ethnically, we consider them to be Jeju people. And the language only has between 5 and 10,000 fluent speakers. There are some young people who speak it mixed with the Korean dialect. However, many of those that speak the full Jeju language, or a heavy Jeju, as some people there may say, it is declining. And the perception of the language amongst people who speak Jeju, at least in the 90s, according to a survey, they saw it very negatively. However, recently, this perception is being understood to be much different, and they tend to have a more positive connotation with their language / dialect. However, it is unknown at this particular time what the status is. There has been a cultural center open up on the island, and a hotline where locals can call asking questions about the language. However, to me, it does seem like the language is in good care now. There's a lot of documentation. There's a magazine where different conversations and articles are written. There's a couple of newspapers that have Jeju language sections, and there's also an elementary school, which is the flagship elementary school that is used to teach the Jeju language. However, in terms of there being a serious revival movement where young people are actually using it every day again, I have not seen any evidence of this. So, unique Jeju all features within the Koreanic family. According to Kosmucha, at a university in Poland, the Jeju language lacks formality and also the honorific system that Korean has to elders. Jeju has its own system, but it's either very simplified or it just never existed in the first place. And according to Omniglot, this language preserves old words which are no longer used in Korean. Those old words are mostly medieval Korean words that are still used in the Jeju language, and the proper Jeju language when you take out the mixture of standard Korean. However, according to Kosmucha, there are also words that are borrowed from Mongolian, from Manchu, Chinese, and Japanese that are not in standard Korean. And there are also words that are indicative of original formation, quote unquote, which probably signal the original Tamna language from the Tamna kingdom that was there. Additional facts about the Jeju language. So there is an extra phoneme in this language. It's a vowel, and it is a back vowel. Not really able to pronounce it that well. However, I've put the IPA in here so that you can see how it is pronounced, and you can put it into the IPA pronunciation engine, which I will leave in the resources in the description below. This phoneme does not exist, or rather this sound is a letter that does not exist in the Hangul of standard Korean. It's usually written with just simply a dot. It looks like a big dot between two consonants that are used. And with most Hangul scripts, it doesn't really work that well with it. However, I'm sure there's a keyboard, because in many examples I've seen of words that have this dot, this all vowel pronounced, it is rendered correctly. And as I mentioned before, there are various sources of vocabulary in the language from various languages. The Mongolians were there for 100 years, and they directly controlled the island as opposed to their indirect control of the mainland of Korea, there was a lot more Mongolian influence, and most of the words that had to do with Mongolian deal with mostly horses and taking care of horses and such. And I'm going to go over more about the vocabulary in the second part. We're not going to be doing that in this video. So this slide shows the possible paths from how Jeju became Jejueo. And so you have one of two. You have one theory saying that it came from late ancient Korean, as you see number 1, continued on and just became Jejueo. And then you have Middle Korean, early Middle Korean split off and created Jejueo. However, one of these two pathways, it may have happened this way, but it is not 100% known. And on to the grammar. So the pronouns of the Jejueo language are very similar, obviously, to mainland Korean because, well, it's a Koreanic language. That's what you would expect. So na is the same as in mainland Korean. As I mentioned before, the Jejueo language has a very complex way of expressing their honorifics. So the way that older people speak to younger people, they'll use certain things, and older people to older people will use a certain thing. And you have these two different pronouns for you. So you have chi and chine, and then you have ni and nu, and nine and nune. So these are it's kind of complex. I don't 100% understand the system yet, which is part of the reason I had to break this video into 2 parts, because I really want to get into the honorific system of this language to show you how it differs from Korean, and 2, how the Jejueo language without mainland Korean influence, how it works, how the people on the island before all of this infiltration from the mainland got there. Like, how did the language actually work in the past? What is the deep Jejueo language using? So, and then the third person, much like Korean, standard Korean, there is not really a third person. However, you can see the word guy being used in some contexts, especially in some of these sentences that we're going to be going over in the verb section. You will see that they use this kai for he or she, much like how standard Korean expresses their version of she and he. Interrogatives. So there is another way you can just use ga, which I will cover that in the second part of this presentation. However, this is the most common way of expressing a question in the Jejueo language. So in the first example here, you have 어디 감수광, where are you going? So the first one, it's shared with mainland Korean. 어디 means where, ka means to go. This is a continuative aspect, which this is actually unique to the Jejueo language, and it is the su is it's not exactly the present. It's more like the ni in standard Korean. It's just a suffix that you use to put on the verb. And then guang. This guang has a little bit of a variation between guang, gua, and, as you may see later, ga. And the second sentence here, you have yepen, which is woman. This is also different from standard Korean. You have this object particle ul or r. And then you have al, which means to know something. And you have This isn't exactly a copula initializer. That's how I understood it before. This is more or less part of this continuative aspect, something that expresses and it has an imperfective or a continuative meaning, an ing meaning. And the su again, where you have that, where it would be ni in Korean, and then you have gua, another question particle. And at the bottom here, chigum, same as Korean. Mo, also the same. And hem. So whenever you have a verb, so heda, whenever you put the base form of the verb there and it ends in a vowel, you just attach the to the end of that. So hem sogwa. What are you doing right now? So a little bit about the syntax. So the language generally follows subject, object, verb syntax just as standard Korean does in general sentences. So but when you get to the verb, it's a little bit of a complex system. It follows what is called the tense mood aspect. And this is not something that exists in standard Korean as far as I know, as far as my research has shown. But however, in Jejueo, there is a 5-part system to this. So you have the verb stem, and you connect the continuative particle to that. The continuative particle can carry the meaning of an imperfective as well, depending on the context. And the next part, because typically it is cut up into 5 different parts, you have the perfective. The perfective is what would be the next one, but because the continuative particle can have an imperfective meaning, I decided that I would put the perfective here. So the perfective will always follow the continuative or the imperfective particle. However, if you're using a perfective, the preceding suffix is going to be continuative in nature, followed by the perfective. However, you have the imperfective, then you can go on and put the mood after that. And then you have the mood, which is prospective or indicative. We will see examples of this mood in a later slide in this presentation. And then you have the tense. So in Jejueo, you can have an unmarked non-past, which is essentially present, and then you have marked non-past. I'm not exactly sure of the difference between the two, but there is a difference. And then you have non-past, you have the past and the future. So the difference between the unmarked and the marked is that the unmarked doesn't have a suffix of its own. It's just simply there, and it just marks non-past. The marked non-past actually has a suffix that goes there, so it actually it's like or something. We'll see this, I believe, in a later slide. And then you have the sentence ending, which could be ora, it could be all, it could be ga. There's different ways. And then you also have connective. We're not going to be going over the connectives in this. However, that will be in part 2 of the presentation. And on to verbs, which is the last part of this presentation, but the verbs get pretty nitty and gritty in this language. So in Jejueo, we have different aspects and we have different moods. So we have the continuative, which is very, very, very used in this language. The continuative aspect in Jejueo generally refers to an ongoing process. It can carry an imperfective aspect as well. And whenever you use it with adjectival verbs, which usually in English we would express with to be cold, you would have to use the verb as an auxiliary before you put the adjective there. However, in Korean and many languages that follow SOV syntax, you have a way to express adjectival verbs. So in the Jejueo language, adjectival verbs like to be cold, whenever you're using the continuative aspect with an adjective, the meaning changes into an inceptive, which would be something like it started to be cold, it started to get hot, that's the kind of meaning that it would have. There's also another word, inchoative. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. I've never seen the word in my life before today. And then you have the perfective aspect. The perfective aspect is an aspect that's referring to an event as a whole. And so we'll get into this a little bit more. This exists in Slavic languages all over the place, as well as imperfective. The continuative has the opposite of that. And then you have the prospective aspect, which this generally expresses an intention to do something, as well as it can also tell future tense. It can also express the future tense. And then you have realis. So realis, and I think aorist is another way you can say this. And Turkish has this, the aortive anyway. This is something that it can express an action or a fact that takes place habitually, and generally when the speaker says it they see it to be true, and this can also be something that has been true over a period of time. So we'll also see this in a later slide in this presentation. So the continuative aspect of verbs in Jejueo. So I've put here the suffixes here. So the continuative when it's used as a perfective. So in this first example, you have mok, shot, or mokashot ikunge. So mok means to eat. This omps means it's like a gerundive in English or an ing, present progressive. And then you have os, which is the perfective. She must have been eating. So as a whole, that action should have been done because she must have been eating, meaning the action of her being eating is finished. It was done. It was one event. It's finished. And then you have eek, which that is a prospective meaning. I'm not exactly sure what its meaning is in this sentence, but she must have been intending to eat, or must have been intending something like this. I'm not exactly sure here in this particular sentence. And then you have which is the non-past, meaning that she must have been continuously eating. That's how I'm interpreting it here, even though it has a have been. And then you have the sentence end ge. This is just simply a sentence ending. And then in the continuative or in the imperfective, you have kwadagebi chaljamso. So I'm not sure why the Hangul did not see. This is what I'm talking about, that dot from earlier. It doesn't render all the time. However, whenever I have, if you look at it with a script that has medieval Korean or that letter in there, it will render. So it looks a little bit weird, and that's because that letter, which only Jejueo has, just messes up the script when you put them in a place that doesn't have that plugin. So anyway, kwalakebi is a frog. Chaj, it's the same as Korean, I believe. Chatda, to search. And then you have amps, which is that continuous or that continuative aspect on there. And then you have umpda, and that's just that is the imperfective combined with the sentence ending. And then in the last sentence, again, I'm not sure why it did not render correctly in this, but this is an example of using an adjectival verb. And in the past example, in the second example, she is looking for that frog. So it's imperfective. It's not. It's an action that's still ongoing. The action hasn't ended yet. It can't be seen as a whole. Therefore, you use this arms here, and you have this imperfective meaning. And then the last one, this is basically used with an adjective in place, the adjective being deep. So cheap is to be deep, or cheapta. Umps is this continuative marker, which in this particular sentence has the inceptive meaning, or something that is beginning. something that is starting. And then you have jo, which is another sentence ending. So it is becoming deep. And then you have the perfective aspect. So this is like I said before, perfective refers to something that it's seen as a whole. So generally the event is finished. Just to make things simple, it refers to an action in the past which it's done. Basically, if you've finished it, if it has a perfective aspect, it's one event, it's finished up, it's done. So in this first sentence here, you have numpi. So numpi are radishes, and you have pat, which means to dig, followed by this perfective, which is this s below pat, and then you have this s, this little thing that looks like it looks like a point. It looks like it's pointing up. I forgot to add the romanization to this one, and then you have jaw, which is a sentence ending. So she dug radishes. She's finished digging radishes. She's done. And this, it's pronounced os usually, but whenever you have this s followed by this j, it takes a t sound. And then the second example here, you have nal. Nal literally means day. I forgot to change this here. I'm sorry. Nal means day. So in this pink color, you have nal. That means day. And then mak means very. And then ol means to be cold. And this is an example of the perfective aspect when you're using the perfective. So it acts a little bit differently than a sentence where you're using an actual verb that is not an adjective. And then you have alt, the perfective here, and then jaw, sentence ending. So it is very cold compared to before. So it is very cold. It's very cold right now. Okay, that coldness may be continuing, but your comparison of it is it's done. That action is done. Compared to before, that action's also done, so you can use a perfective here. That's how I understand it. And then the moods. So the two moods, there may be more, but these are the two main ones that I have been seeing in my research up to now. You have the prospective, as we discussed earlier. The prospective generally means that you have an intention to do something. And however, it can also express a future tense as well with it. Intention usually indicates that it's something that will be done, or it's your intention to get it done. So in this first sentence here, chisel, potato, tege, to throw, and then you have kya. So this k, this is the prospective, and then you have y'all, which is a sentence ending. So it's kind of pushing in together in this last one. So there wasn't really a way to separate them because it's in Korean, it's one block of letters. I will throw away the potato. So you have the intention to throw away the potato, you will throw it away. And then the second example here, kai, which is, as I mentioned earlier in the pronouns, it usually is used for he or she. This is one of the examples where you'll see that at. And then you have chire, meaning height. You have ga, which is a nominative ending. And then you have k, which means to throw, or kuda means to throw. And then you have k, which is a prospective in the future. So this is prospective in the future. It's indicating more of the future here. And then you have which is simply a sentence ending. And then in the realis, or the indicative, in Jejueo, the realis or the indicative form is typically used whenever you see something as being true. This can mean that it's something it's something that it's true to you right now, or it's something that has been true for a while. So in the one example sentence we have here, the second example sentence used this same form. However, I decided to just break it up into this because it just doesn't make sense to write the exact same thing twice, in my opinion. So here you have e, which is this. You have shin, which is shoe. And then you have n, which is the informal second singular pronoun. And then you have api, which is a strictly unique Jejueo way of saying to, or expressing the dative to or for you. And then you have k, which is to be big. So kda means to be big. And then you have nya. And nya is... I believe it's an interrogative in this particular sentence. So is this shoe too big for you right now? And then if you replace the nya at the end of the sentence here and you put a nunya, it would be, has this shoe always been too big for you? And then this one it's combining nouns and verbs. However, these are known as abnominal suffixes, and many languages like Turkish, mainland Korean, Japanese, Mongolian probably has this as well. Many languages that follow this SOV syntax, they generally have something like this. So you can say the already warm room. You could say the room that used to be warm, the unusually warm room, which we don't usually say in English. You would say the room that is usually warm. And then the final example here literally means will pluck vegetables. So vegetables that he or she will pluck. So in the first example here, you can express it with un. And there are cases in the unmarked non-past where in the marked non-past you have un. However, in the non-marked past, which I don't believe this is attributive or an adnominal suffix, you don't even use that. So that it's the same there. So you have taus, which is warmth, and then you have in. So in mainland Korean, you cannot put this in after a noun. However, in Jejueo, you kind of can. So it's or now, or it would, because it's warmth, but it can be used as an adjectival or adjectivally, meaning that it can be turned into a verb. So it essentially would be to be warm, or this would be like the room with warmth. So this in turns it into warm. So daoshin kudu. So this in it already has an e, as you'll see in the later sentences. This is a past because it's simply just adding the to it. And then you have kudu, room. And then in the second example, you have the same word, daus, warmth. And then you have don, which it's a habitual past marker. So daus don kudu, the room that used to be warm. So don, that used to be something that is, it's done in the past. It was constantly done in the past. The room was warm for a long period of time in the past, or it was always warm. And then this one expresses the present tense. So inun. And daus again is warm or warmth, and inun. So daus inun makes it that is usually, or something that is going on right now. It turns the room, it adds this adjectival quality to the room at this current time. And then in this example, you have taud, which is, I'm assuming tauda means to pluck a vegetable, or to pluck in general. So taud, and then you have which is a present, it's a future tense suffix that you can add on to directly to a verb. So you have taudil, sonki. I believe it's just changed to all now in the modern forms of the language. So Seongki. Seongki. Vegetables that he or she will pluck. Anyhow, this is all I have today for this particular presentation. I'm going to have a second version coming out where we will go over the honorific system. We're going to go over the limited honorifics that they do have, the informal and the formal and the plain versions we'll be going over. We're going to be going over the vocabulary more and showing you what's Mongolian, what was left from Japanese, maybe Manchu and Chinese as well, if we can find those, and some other aspects of this language that have, that are unique to Jejueo, as there's a lot of stuff and that's just too much to cover in one video. However, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Thank you all for watching. Subscribe if you want to see more language presentations like this. Like and share this video if you liked it, and I will see you all in the next video.